Welcome to Slacker Sports Show.
Good evening, sports fans, and welcome to another podcast episode of Slacker Sports Show, where we discuss the NFC North. This is a Sunday special, I guess, is what you want to call it. And for the Sunday special, we're going to bring in co-host of the podcast, Mark. How are you, Mark?
Doing well. Ready to discuss the last division in the NFC North. We've covered the other three in previous division podcast, and for me, this division has two teams that are legitimate contenders and then two teams I have no idea what they're doing. So it'll be fun to talk about how this division will play out this year.
And this is all basically recorded in the fact that we will be having a football season. It sounds like we will. There's no preseason at this point. It sounds like we are getting a full season, but again, everything's up in the air and anything could change within a day or so. So if, we record this and then tomorrow there's no NFL season, we apologize, but we're just recording this knowing what we know now. And the first thing we know is that the Green Bay Packers finished 13-3 last year, obviously making the playoffs. I would say they didn't. I thought they would be better in the playoffs. They didn't really do what I thought they would. I mean, they still made it pretty far, but they were a team that I thought would possibly play for the Super Bowl, but they didn't make it. The 49ers did, and so they're 13-3 last season. What do you think about the Packers, Mark?
I think they're, along with the Vikings, both contenders for the division title this year. I do have some questions, and one of them is about Aaron Rodgers. I mean, he's been good for a really long time, but he's kind of getting up there, and he's in the same class as like Drew Brees, Tom Brady, where they're still good, they're still productive, but they may not be what they used to be. And I mean, he's got a lot of weapons. He can still throw it around, still got a good arm, but I mean, they drafted Jordan Love in the first round, which was the story of the draft basically, and They may be looking to, if he starts to drop off, either get rid of him or kind of start to change gears. And I'm just kind of interested to see what he has this year, and if he comes out and has a vintage Rodgers season, or if he starts to slip a little bit more. And one thing that we talked about before this podcast was rosters are basically set at this point, so there's not going to be a lot of opt-out news. But one thing that did hit the Packers was that Devin Funchess opted out for this season for coronavirus reasons, for safety and health reasons, and he was one player that they brought in this offseason to be a weapon for Aaron Rodgers, to give him a little bit more skill position talent, and now he's gone. And I mean, I don't blame him, but we've talked about this. If you feel like you need to opt out, that's fine by us, but I mean, that's one of the big weapons they tried to get just gone for him. And other skill position players that could play a role and may have some impact for you in fantasy is receiver Davante Adams. I mean, I've never personally had him on my team, but I know he's a pretty consistent scorer for people. And then somebody I did have last year but may not be worth a high pick in my opinion is Aaron Jones. At least last year he was on and off. He disappointed me many times. I mean, he'd have a 10-point game and then maybe have 2 or 3 of those in a row, and then I'd sit him and play somebody else, and they'd have a 40-point game. He kind of is maybe not boom or bust because he'll get some production every week, but he's not going to have monster games each week. What do you maybe see for the Packers that I'm not seeing?
Well, it's one of those things. It's weird to see that they went 13-3 with the roster they have.
Yeah,
because they don't have a great, phenomenal defense. They just kind of outscore teams, and they're kind of moving towards the multiple running backs, which is kind of why Aaron Jones didn't really perform as well as we wanted him to last year. They're more doing like the dual running backs, or kind of just running back by committee, which a lot of teams are going to, because like Jamal Williams last year had a few games where he went off instead of Aaron Jones. So, it's kind of hard, from a fantasy thing, and fantasy is something that's constantly changing, and NFL changing too. We're running into teams that don't give the running back the ball every single time, and they have 2 or 3 running backs they use. And now we got teams throwing to running backs, and we still have some of the old school teams that are giving the running back every single time and letting him just plow yards. So the NFL's changing, fantasy's changing. The Packers are changing as well. I'm with you on the Aaron Rodgers thing. How many more years does Aaron Rodgers have left before he starts slipping? We've kind of seen it in, I would say, Brady. I would say Brady's kind of been slipping. I really saw it this last year. He just didn't have the it factor that Brady's had for so many years. Just not being able to convert in big-time situations that normally he does convert in. He just couldn't do it this year. And I don't know if that's something that he'll have this year again. Maybe he will go back and decide, I just didn't have it this year. Maybe I try this and he comes back better next year. But Aaron Rodgers, the biggest thing for me with Rodgers is I feel like he is more injury prone in this offense, and I feel like he might have a problem this year with injuries. I know he's had a few injuries in the past where, he's missed like 1 game or 2 games or something like that, but he's getting old enough to where an injury could basically be done with his career, or could definitely set him out for multiple weeks, which would completely change his team. But I think what they're doing, and if you remember right, when Brett Favre was the quarterback of the Packers and they drafted Aaron Rodgers, everyone threw a fit and they're like, no, what are they doing? What are they doing? And now Aaron Rodgers has been one of the best quarterbacks for the past 10 plus years. So they might be trying the same thing where they think Jordan Love can be their next Aaron Rodgers and Brett Favre, and maybe this is Rodgers' last season to kind of teach Jordan Love the ropes and how to do it. Or maybe they're doing, they're bringing him in and saying, if Aaron Rodgers gets hurt, this guy's our next guy up and we'll see how he does. I don't know. I think the Packers will not be 13-3 this year. I don't think they have enough people at skill positions to warrant the 13-3 that they had last year. I also think their defense got worse through the offseason. Davante Adams, a great wide receiver. I don't know if it's weird because I don't think Davante Adams is a top 5 wide receiver, yet he puts up top wide receiver numbers. And so it's weird because people are drafting him in the first round, and I'm just like, why would you do that? He's not a top 5 wide receiver. But for some reason, with Aaron Rodgers, he is a top 5 wide receiver. So I don't know. I don't think the Packers are going to be as good as they were last year, but they did finish 13-3, so it's hard to say that they're not going to be good this year. Another team that we both think that could definitely push them is the Minnesota Vikings. Minnesota Vikings went 10-6 last year. A bunch of big names kind of out and some decent people in. What are you thinking about the Minnesota Vikings this year?
I think they have the potential to win this division. I was kind of disappointed they didn't last year. I think they have probably the most complete team in the North. Obviously, they did lose Stefon Diggs. They traded him to the Bills with a seventh round pick and got back a first round pick, a 5th round pick, and a 6th round pick this year, and then a 4th next year, which came not too long after the DeAndre Hopkins trade and looks like they got a lot bigger haul for that, which is something we could talk about in the AFC South podcast. But Stefon Diggs is gone, so you have a big-time receiver, another big-time fantasy guy gone. But they did draft Justin Jefferson out of LSU to replace him, and I know Jefferson's been productive at the collegiate level. I know he mostly plays in the slot, so it'll be interesting to see how he adapts to changing positions. But if he's even close to what he was in college, he could be a pretty good replacement for Diggs. You did say they have some people kind of headed out. They lost a couple of guys in their defense. I think they released Xavier Rhodes. They've kind of maybe tried to cut back on spending on defense there. Their defense was good for a long time with Mike Zimmer, their head coach, kind of being in charge of all that. But they still got a lot of good household names on that defense. Danielle Hunter, Anthony Barr, Harrison Smith, all guys that are maybe not Pro Bowl level, all of them, but are are all solid guys that'll keep your defense in it. When I looked at team defensive statistics, they're in the top half of the league in most categories. And like we've talked about on some other divisions, an even average defense plus a good offense could win you a division. There's a lot of defensive in the league that struggle. So just having an average defense and an offense that'll score you enough points could be enough. And then from a fantasy perspective, someone I've had before, Adam Theilen, he's struggled with injuries, but when he's right, he's putting up great numbers and consistent on a week-to-week basis. Dalvin Cook, another guy that's had injuries in the past, but he's one of those running backs that's kind of a jack of all trades and get you points receiving, get you points running, could really swing a division for you. I think he was close to the top as far as running backs last year, and from other fantasy podcasts I've listened to, he's up there again if he can stay healthy. Justin Jefferson, seeing some people saying, even though he's a rookie, take a kind of a flyer on him because if he could be getting quite a few targets. Kyle Rudolph, their tight end, he's been iffy. If you're looking for a tight end, I don't know if I'd go with him. I've had him before and can maybe get you 7-8 points, but he's not going to get you Kelsey or Kittle type numbers. So he may not be the strongest fantasy option on their team, but they do have a couple good skill position players, and I think more options for Kirk Cousins to throw to than maybe Aaron Rodgers has.
Yeah, and I would kind of agree with that. The Minnesota Vikings offense is actually, I feel like, better than the Packers, and that's just because, I mean, Green Bay has basically three: Aaron Rodgers, Davante Adams, and then their running back position. Whereas Minnesota's got, I mean, they've got a Theilen who, like you said, Jefferson is normally playing the slot, but that's Thielen's spot. And Theilen, I think, can only produce out of the slot. Kind of like in New England, only certain people could perform out of the slot. They are not number one wide receivers. They're slot wide receivers. So I think Jefferson will actually be better. He's a big dude, and I think he's going to be better being the number one. I'm not sure if he is actually the number one wide receiver on the roster, and I guess only time will tell that. But I feel like Jefferson could, honestly, like Minnesota Vikings, what they did trading Stefon Diggs is the best trade I've seen in years, because not only do they get rid of that big contract, because Diggs is going to want big money soon, and he's already got a pretty decent-sized contract, a pretty big chunk. You're getting in Jefferson, basically you're replacing, and I would say Jefferson will be as good as Diggs in a couple of years, if not sooner. I think Jefferson will have the biggest impact of rookies in the whole draft class as far as like production numbers go, like as skill positions. I think Jefferson will be soon a top wide receiver in the league. So the fact that they traded, they got salary cap money, they got a first round pick, fifth round pick, sixth round pick, a fourth round pick. They got all of these picks. Is completely insane that they even made this trade. But yeah, I think Minnesota is setting themselves up to be a playoff contender for several years. They don't have an old, quote unquote, old quarterback. They've found someone that works with their offense. They've found someone that can kind of, Alex Smith games, just kind of control the games, not go crazy, not throw it behind your back passes like Patrick Mahomes, nothing like that. But they've got a good, solid core of people, and they're just kind of slowly adding to it. So I actually have Minnesota Vikings winning the division this year. I think they're better than the Packers on offense and defense both. But again, we'll have to wait and see kind of what the division as a whole does. I don't know about the next team. We're going to talk about how they're going to do, just because I have no idea what the heck is going on in Chicago. I live about 2.5 hours away from Chicago now, and I still don't know what the heck's going on there. They seem to have some decent baseball teams, but their football team is not as good as they should be as far as how much time and effort they seem to put in to Chicago. They just get nothing done.
Yeah, and like I said at the top of the podcast, I mean, I think Minnesota and Green Bay are the two teams that kind of have an idea of what they are, and then Chicago and Detroit, who we'll finish up with. I'm not sure what their plan is. Seems like the Mitchell Trubisky experience, whatever you want to call it, may be over. They traded for Nick Foles and that big contract. Jaguars want to get off of that. And Nick Foles has been solid, but not sure if he's worth the money you're going to be paying him, and I'm not sure he's going to do enough to make your offense great. They brought in two guys that have had production in the past, but I don't know if they can do much anymore in Jimmy Graham and Ted Ginn Jr. In my opinion, I don't know if that'll be enough to really spark their offense or do anything too much more. I mean, Jimmy Graham's been solid, but he's not the New Orleans Jimmy Graham that everybody kind of wants him to be. And Ted Ginn's been in the league for a while, so he's not producing like he used to. Their defense, statistically, I think is the best in the division. We talked about Minnesota having a solid defense, but if you look at the stats from last year, Chicago was basically in the top 10 or one of the top defenses overall. Obviously, they have Khalil Mack, made that big trade. Was that last year or the year before? They also brought in Robert Quinn this year, who may have not been what everybody thought he was going to be coming out of college, but he did have 11.5 sacks last year, which was up there as far as league leaders, and then 2 forced fumbles to be a linebacker on the other side opposite Khalil Mack. And so they have a good defense, but there's just like no direction with their offense. And a good defense can only get you so far in today's NFL, and their offense needs to do something to catch up. I don't know if Nick Foles is the answer. Trubisky, I don't think is. There's enough kind of proof on him, and it will never not be funny seeing people say, oh, you could have had Patrick Mahomes, you could have had Deshaun Watson in the same draft, and he chose Mitchell Trubisky, who's out of the league basically at this point. So I'm not really sure what Chicago's plan is. They're just kind of one of those teams who looks like they're going to be in the middle for a long time and doesn't have a path to the top, but maybe won't be bottoming out, and that's not really where you want to be in the NFL. So I am thoroughly confused by Chicago, and I don't think they're going to be good this year, but I don't know what to expect as far as a record.
And I think the biggest thing for me with this team is their 8-8 record is their defense being absolutely demolishing teams. If you remember right, I think it was the first couple of weeks, their defense scored like almost all their touchdowns because their defense was so good. And I expect the same thing this year from them as well, is that their defense will be absolutely amazing and will win them games. And I think that's the only reason they finished 8-8 last year, was because their defense was so good. The problem with that is, like what you said on their offensive side, is they've got honestly, the Detroit Lions have a better offense than the Chicago Bears do right now. The Chicago Bears, no idea what's going on. They got Cordell Patterson, who every once in a while he might score a touchdown. It's not like he's a touchdown guy. They got Jimmy Graham, who's probably in the last season or two of his career, I don't see him doing really anything. They brought in Nick Foles, who has been with injuries. I mean, I don't know if they're trying to light a fire under Trubisky or what's going on there, but I don't think Nick Foles is going to be the answer for them. They bring in Ted Ginn, again, who's basically like Cordell Patterson, except older. And so I have no idea. And they have Allen Robinson, who was good for 2 years, and then they gave him a crappy quarterback, and now he's terrible. So I just don't understand what is going on. They spend all this money on their defense, but then they don't do anything on offense. And I'm sorry to tell you, but they say defense wins championships, but you still have to have a decent offense. I mean, this offense is literally probably one of the worst 3 offenses in the NFL. They're absolutely terrible. They're absolutely awful. They could not do anything last year. Yet they're still 8-8 because their defense was that good. And I think this year their defense will still be that good, but their offense is so bad that it won't matter. You have to have a good enough offense to complement your defense. Otherwise, there's no way you're going to win. Like division championships. Obviously, they proved their defense is good enough to win them games, but 8-8 is not going to get you to the Super Bowl. So, the Chicago Bears are just, I have no idea what's going on or why they even do what they do. I don't know how they won 8 games last year. I mean, as we said, it was their defense. But, the fact that they won 8 games with that offense is anything short but a miracle. So I don't know. And they didn't do anything this year. Their draft class was meh. I mean, they didn't go out and get any like big guys that, we could be like, oh yeah, this guy could probably be a star. They didn't do that. It's been anything but good in Chicago. And I know Chicago people are getting upset about it because Chicago has a very strong fan base when it comes to their sports. They love the Cubs and they love the Bears, and the Bears aren't doing it for them, and they're starting to get mad. And I don't know if they're ready for a coaching change. I don't know if anything. I don't know. I have no idea what's going on in Chicago with the Bears. I don't know if they need more winter games. I don't know what their problem is, but basically it comes down to is their offense is not great, and their defense can only win them so many games.
Well, and something I've been thinking about is we talked about when some of the other NFC division podcasts wasting young talent. Saquon in New York. Some other people that we've kind of hit on as far as not surrounding them. Christian McCaffrey, who I was thinking of in Carolina. Not surrounding them with what they need. And Khalil Mack is obviously a stud, one of the best defensive players in the NFL, but he could have this great defense, but he may not get success in the playoffs if you don't do anything with your offense. And you're just kind of wasting that defensive talent. And say he does what Luke Kuechly did and retires after 8 seasons in the league. You're kind of stuck with a defense that is losing its best playmaker and then still nothing on offense. So he may get frustrated and want to head somewhere else or just retire, and you've kind of wasted a generational talent. So they need direction, either sink to the bottom or make a move to try to get to the top. And speaking of teams that are at the bottom, the Detroit Lions were 3-13 last year. They were last in the division. Thanks. I've been working on my transitions. 3-13 last year. Matt Patricia, I heard on a podcast on The Ringer today that they think Kevin Clark of The Ringer thinks he may be the first coach fired, which would not surprise me at all. He's brought over from New England and supposed to be this defensive wizard and really hasn't done anything. They did go out and try to address a hole. Their pass defense was, I think, the worst in the league as far as pass yards allowed. They had the 3rd overall pick this year. They got Jeff Okudah out of Ohio State, so that maybe helped filling a need. I think he's on track to start. Their other parts of their defense are a little bit stronger, but their defense struggles overall, and he may be a tone setter for them going forward. But I don't know if he'll set the tone this first year, but could be a guy that changes the culture over 5 or 10 years. Like we talked about, their offense does have some skill position guys that are notable that could get you some production and may keep them in games. Matthew Stafford, been putting up crazy good numbers for a long time, but he did have a serious back injury last year that took him out of a lot of games, and I don't think I've heard anything as far as him not being able to come back, but it was a long road to recover last year, and there's a chance he could get injured again, and he's another guy who's been in the league for a while and may not have a whole lot left, especially if you are putting him on losing teams. He may get frustrated and want to leave as well. Fantasy-wise, Kenny Golladay is a solid option. I think I picked him up about halfway through last year and really kind of helped shore up my wide receiver position the last half of the year. I think he may have led the league in receiving yards. I'm not sure. I looked at that earlier today, but I'd have to double check. And then Marvin Jones Jr., I think, had the most touchdowns on their team and is another solid option if you're looking for maybe a third wide receiver or somebody on your bench that could get you some points in a random week. Marvin Jones Jr. is another solid option. What are you thinking on the Lions this year?
Like you said, their offense is loaded as far as they got that skill positions. I do know that they struggle on their offensive line, and they're struggling to find a running back that they can count on, and I think a lot of that is their offensive line. They drafted, I think last year or the year before, they kind of went hard on the running backs, and they've had a few kind of do something, but I don't think they can do too much because of the offensive line just being kind of bad. They got Kerryon Johnson, who they think is basically going to be their next star. But they also have Ty Johnson, who has done some decent stuff. And then they got Bo Scarborough, who has also done some stuff. So they got like 3 running backs that could be great if they had a good offensive line, and I feel like they didn't really address their offensive line problems this year. I thought that would honestly be what they kind of address first. Their defense isn't awful. They got some names in there that kind of make me think that they would have a decent defense. I mean, obviously they went 3-13 last season, so their defense wasn't great. But I don't know if that would have been the first thing I fixed on this team. Patricia, he's a defensive mind. He did a really good job in New England, but I don't think that, and I don't know this for a fact, but I feel like defensive head coaches don't fare as well as offensive-minded head coaches. And the great offensive coaches, or the great head coaches that come through the league, are mostly offensive-generated coaches, not defense. Again, yes, you can win championships with defense, but if your offense isn't good, then it doesn't matter how good your defense is. And I feel like that's kind of what's in Detroit. They have all this offensive talent. They just don't do anything with it. And so no matter how good they make their defense, or no matter how good their head coach is at defensive plays and stuff, if they don't have an offense, they can't do anything with it. Going over to their defense side, and kind of when I said, like, some people might be like, no, their defense is bad, which is weird because he's a defensive head coach, but they do have some pretty decent people on that side that should be making either a bigger impact and they're just not, or, they got Reggie Ragland from the Chiefs, and he's a good linebacker, and once he got there, he didn't really do anything, and I don't know if it's, again, that he's just not in a good position, or I don't think as a player you go from being really good on a defense to really bad that you went from a good player to a bad player. Same thing with, I don't think you very rarely go from being a really good player and then just turn into a bad player. There's players that aren't really good and then they turn to being good just because they've learned stuff. But normally people don't forget how to tackle and stuff. So from going from a defense that was good, where you played good, and going to a defense that's not so good and you don't play very good, I don't think it's that he got worse. I just think that he wasn't in the position where he was somewhere else. Another player on that defense that's really good, that has done well, but the defense still isn't showing it, is Gerard Davis. And he's one of the best young linebackers, yet defense isn't good. They got Trufant, yet defense isn't good. So it's hard to find out what's going on with this team because they have such a strong offense and a semi-decent defense, yet they still went 3-13 last year. I don't know what's going on. I don't know if Stafford is maybe at the time where they start looking for another quarterback. They didn't address it in the draft. They went after some defensive weapons, which I'm sure is going to help. They could use a better cornerback, especially in this division where, they got Aaron Rodgers throwing the ball around, and they got really good players in this division with the Vikings and Packers. And as I said, as we said before, Chicago Bears got that great defense. But yeah, I just don't know what I think about Detroit. I feel like every single year we come in and say, Detroit's team's looking pretty good. Yet they always seem to finish like 5-11, 3-13. I don't understand what's going on in Detroit. They should not be this bad. They should not have that record.
And I think one thing you hit on, kind of defensive coaches and maybe coaches excelling at one side of the ball. I think the great coaches in the league can see what their weakness is and find somebody to fill that in. I mean, Bill Belichick, what people consider maybe the greatest coach of all time, he's a defensive-minded coach, but he has found guys to coach on offense like Josh McDaniels that can make up for maybe an area where he lacks. In this division, Mike Zimmer, he's more of a defensive-minded guy with the Vikings, but he's brought in different offensive coordinators. I think they brought in Gary Kubiak either this year or last year, somebody who's been an offensive-minded league for a long time. they bring in people who can help them out in a place they struggle. And Detroit has just seemed like they've had a lot of turnover on the offensive side. And maybe that's a clash with Patricia. Maybe he's hard to get along with. I don't know. I haven't heard anything like that. But he doesn't maybe seem to address places where he's weak as a coach as much as maybe some of the other good coaches in the league. And kind of to wrap things up, with each of these division podcasts, we've kind of predicted our what we think is going to happen in the division this year. So what's your kind of order of finish in this division this year?
So I got the Vikings actually beating the Packers out this year. I just think the Packers are too risky right now with Rodgers, because Rodgers is their offense. If Rodgers goes down, that offense goes from a 13-3 like last season to a 6-10 team. So I worry about the Packers to be able to put them as my favorite. Minnesota Vikings, I feel like, are probably the better all-around team. I feel like they actually have a little more offense than the Packers do, and a little more defense as well. I just think that their 10-6 record last year, they just kind of fell into some holes that they couldn't get out of. So I got the Vikings first, Packers second, and then I don't really know what to do with the Bears and the Lions. I don't think the Bears are going to go 8-8 again because they have no offensive ability. I think their defense is what got them there, and I don't know if their defense got better, which is sad that their defense could actually get better, and I just don't see them doing much. I do have them in third. I don't think they're going to finish 8-8 this year. And then Detroit in last. I would say they get 5 wins this year, so I'd say they go like 5-11 or something like that. What do you got?
I have the same order. I think Minnesota may have just struggled in a couple areas last year, but I could see them being the 13-win team this year if everything goes right. If Jefferson really pops and is productive, I think they could be a division winner and maybe one of the top teams in the NFC as far as record. Green Bay, I see stepping back and maybe just kind of flip-flopping records. I could see Green Bay maybe getting 10 wins this year, unless they go out and trade for somebody and try to bring somebody in. I don't know if they have enough to match the offensive firepower of the Vikings. So Vikings first, Packers second. I agree, Chicago third. I could see them maybe going 8-8 this year. I have maybe a little bit more faith in what their record might be. I think their defense, again, will keep them in games, but I don't see them having a stellar record like we've talked about because there's not really anything going on offense. And then Detroit, I still have them last. I think they still need a couple more pieces. They may pick up a win or two more than they did last year, but I see them finishing fourth in the division as well.
So next podcast we're going to do, next NFL podcast we're going to do is going to be flipping over to the AFC, and I think we'll start with the AFC North, just kind of do like north, south, east, west. So we're going to start with the AFC North. So next Sunday we'll have the AFC North ready for you guys to listen to.
And thank you everybody for listening. We have our normal podcast on Thursday, and then these NFL division previews on Sundays leading up to the season. We appreciate all the feedback we're getting, all the subscribers and followers on Twitter. And if you haven't subscribed, make sure you do that wherever you get your podcast. If you're listening on Apple or Spotify or whatever app you use. We also have a YouTube channel that we're going to start putting up more and more content. We do have the recordings of our podcast with some kind of graphics behind it up there, but going to start putting more YouTube-specific content up there. And you can find that by searching Slackers Sports Show. And then you can also find us on Twitter. We post our podcasts there, the links to them, to get updates on what episodes are coming up, on different stories we find interesting, little tidbits, things like that by searching @Slackers Sports on Twitter.
We will see you guys Thursday with our normal podcast and then another AFC North podcast next Sunday.